Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm with Pierre Black once again. Pierre is a very old friend of mine and had the pleasure of doing an interview with me a couple of weeks ago. And we are longtime friends. We've been kind of going through this journey of, just figuring out our own truths and figuring out who we are and what we're going to do with life like everyone. And we often have these really interesting conversations. And oftentimes you're like, man, we should have recorded that. So today we're recording it. And so to give you a little bit more background on Pierre, he is a naturopath and a life coach. And how is it that you like to call it?
Change agent.
Change agent. Yes, I love that. I really, really like that. Change agent. So tell me a little bit more, or tell our viewers, because I know where you come from, but tell our viewers a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
It gets really, really hard to pin down exactly what I do. So I often just call myself a naturopath, but then I realize that a lot of people don't know what a naturopath is. I've been a meditation teacher. I've run a bunch of different retreats, and I'm involved with 2 Zen temple retreats in Japan. I had my own retreat for a year in Thailand. So I guess I teach tools and techniques and inputs for improved well-being and happiness and health using primarily natural means.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do. Recently, I've branched out into essential oils, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. And what I mean by that is making essential oils from scratch, distillation, working with a really incredible master of distillation in Vietnam, and working with them and their company. I've been making my own skin products, skincare products and medicines, and now I'm starting into perfumes and aromatic oils recently. So that's what's really exciting me these days. And the type of products that we're using are also, it's another path to healing. So that's where it relates to being a naturopath and my regular work. So yeah, I do a lot. It's hard to pin it down. I'm very happy to be here. It's nice to be having another great conversation with you. We've had so many have gone undocumented, and they've been so good that I think it really deserves to be covered. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. So my challenge is to let go of my control issues and just allow this conversation to just go with the flow and kind of go wherever it takes us. So there is no real goal for this conversation. I'm going to figure out the title and description after we talk and see where it leads us. But we were talking before about discovering truth. How do you know what's true? And I really like that conversation. So I kind of want to touch on that again, without getting too political. But I think that's something that everyone is really feeling right now. We just have this insecurity from all this information that we're getting from so many different ways. And especially the younger generation, they don't watch the news, they don't read newspapers. So they're getting their information from things like Facebook and Instagram. How credible is that? And how can we figure out what's true?
Wow, that's a big question to start out with. I'll take it back just to one point that you made, and you were talking about this conversation being free form. And what that brought up in me is the idea that we are just trying to be totally present with each other and in kind of flow. And then my mind went to the problem that people are having, fundamental problem that people are having during this pandemic, is that we've lost the ability to predict our future. Many, many people have lost the ability to predict their future. So
Mm-hmm.
income is unpredictable, location might be unpredictable. Um, Whether people can plan to see their friends and loved ones is unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, just about everything in the world is kind of unpredictable right now. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to notice how destabilizing that is to not be able to predict our future. And in meditative and spiritual culture and practice, we're always talking about presence, right?
Mm-hmm.
How important
Yeah.
it is, like, get into the moment. Only today is important. Deal with what is. And then we get this shock when we actually can't predict the future
Mm-hmm.
on a mass scale. We get this shock realizing how not present we are.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to touch on that because all of those, as you were introducing this conversation, all of that came up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then that brings us in a way as well to what is true and how do we determine what is true or more likely to
Mm-hmm.
be true.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really
Mm-hmm.
interesting topic.
Presence. Absolutely. I mean, presence is definitely a good way to tap into what is true. You know,
Hmm.
getting letting go of our past ideas or past experiences and our future um, um, opportunities that don't exist. You know, and it's like really tapping into this moment, this reality right now, because reality is only right now. You know,
Right.
the past is not reality and the future is not reality. So it's really presence is definitely has a lot to do with that. Absolutely, with truth.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for
So
rolling back on that.
now that I've gone off on a big tangent, I'll turn your actual question around. Um, how do you personally determine what is true or what is likely to be true?
For me, it's about my values and the boundaries that I've set up for myself. That'll be something that will be my first go-to. Um, Also, my intuition. Definitely my intuition. You know, what is my gut telling me? I think that would probably be the number one thing before I even look at anything else. Is like, how do I feel right now? What is my gut telling me?
Mm,
Because I've trained my intuition, and it's usually pretty good. So I tend to trust it. You know, so that'll be the first thing for me. Is most of the time, obviously, we're not. You know, no one does this all the time, but I'll take a moment to just try to take a step back and drop in and see how am I feeling this moment about this decision. And then from that place, if I need more information, then um, I'll go to my values. I'll go to the boundaries that I've set for myself in my life. And if I need another opinion, or sometimes I just need to talk about it. That's what I realized too. Like sometimes I'll call someone and be like, oh, I'm really like having a hard time. I don't know how to make this decision. And I'll call someone and I realize like, I don't really want your opinion. I just want to get what's in my brain out so I can hear it, you know, because I'm not able to drop into my belly right now. I'm stuck in my head, you know, and then I have all these thoughts and then I get stuck in
right.
that tourbillon, like that whirlwind of just like, and it's just like, I just need to get everything that's in my brain out so that I can hear it. And then I can be like, oh yeah, of course. Like oftentimes I'll hear myself say the answer, you know?
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that recently with some of the decisions that I've had to make where I just call someone and then they're giving me like their opinion or like, oh, well, I think they do this. And I'm just like, that's not what I want. Like, no, don't give me your opinion. I don't want to know what you would do. I'm trying to figure out what I need to do. You know, we all have different experiences. We're all coming from a different place. What's good for you is not necessarily good for me. So,
Right.
yeah, oftentimes what I'm looking for is just to hear myself.
And you can
You know,
tell when
really.
people are doing that as well. When somebody's like I don't really want to fully listen. I don't really want to hold space right now. I just like you have a problem, I have a solution, and let's get it over with and get on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a different kind of presence when somebody's like holding space for you, and that's something I think fundamental to like counseling and coaching is what are we doing right now? Are we listening and holding space and allowing the client, the friend, whoever it is, to come up with their own solution? Or are we being asked for a specific solution? You know, how do I fix this thing? And here's the answer, right? They're two very, very different things.
Yeah. To me, I find the best counseling are people that allow you to find your own answer, because
Right.
that to me is truth.
Right.
You coming up with your own answer is more true than someone else coming up with an answer and telling you what to do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there could be cases where that's not true. If someone has, you know, a mental illness, or they're just, you know, in a rage at some point, and they think that, you know, if it's coming from emotions. So of course, you know, keeping that in mind. But I think if someone is in their right mind and they can come from a calm place, then their ability to find the truth is much greater.
Right. Right.
Has been for me anyways. It's definitely been, you know, and I have my little things too. Like, you know, I come from a more spiritual train of thought. So for me, some of the little things that I do will be pull my cards, you know, I'll pull my tarot cards, and that helps guide me. You know, for me, it's not like a yes or no. I never ask a question that's yes or no. And often I'll even leave it up and just be like, what do I need to hear right now? Like, just give me some guidance, be a signpost, you know? And then through my interpretation of the cards, that'll often reflect something that I already knew, but that I couldn't grab.
Right.
And then that'll bring it to light. And then from there, I can be like, oh, right. Okay. Of course, this is what I'm doing. Like, this is in alignment with me. And it's not so much about the card, but it's just the card from interpretation brought me to that answer. Right.
Right.
And the moon, very much in touch with the moon and everything that happens in the planetary system. For me, especially this one woman, Sarah Verba, who is an amazing moon interpreter. Like, she's just bang on, like, all the time. Everything she says, I just feel like she's talking to me personally. You know, it's exactly what's going on in my life. So for me, her interpretation of what's happening is really in line with the way I see it and the way I feel it. So we have that same kind of communication pattern or thought pattern. I don't know what it is, but so she's one of my guides. You know, she's somebody that I look up to in moments where I'm just like, man, I really don't know, like, what is going on right now? Something's going on in the planet, you know? And then I'll look up at that, and then of course there's like some retrograde or something going on, and then it enlightens a part of what I'm going through and allows me to step back from it and see it from a different perspective, and then that gives me the ability to better deal with it.
Right. So, other than how it feels, excuse me, other than how it feels to have that experience, how do you determine if something is true? And we might even have to define like what we mean by true.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. First of all, I mean, you know, your truth is not my truth. So I don't think there is one truth that is the ultimate truth for everything and everyone and every time. I think that truth is subjective. And so for me, if I say, you know, well, what's true? I mean, and of course, you know, you'll look at scientific things and they'll they'll have facts and things like that. But even that, even that, you'll have someone that it's like, well, this is the fact. The planet is flat. We know this, right? People were burned because they said that the planet was round. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, no, guess what? It's a globe. Like, we know this, it's a fact. And now we've gone back to what are they called? Flat earthers or whatever. So, truth changes, and facts are not always facts.
It's important to note that we haven't actually gone back to flat earth being true.
So people, no, not being true, but people thinking and being so convinced that this is their truth. They live on a flat earth. This is their truth, 100%. Right? So yeah, it's hard to determine, what is truth. So for me, the way I've navigated life is what is true for me in this moment. And I allow that to change. What is true for me today might not be true for me tomorrow.
Right.
So that's my answer.
It's interesting because I feel like what you just outlined, we haven't talked about this yet, but my position, both personally and professionally, is that I have always tried to have one foot firmly planted in science and objective truth and hard truth and shareable truth, or what we might call like a universal truth. Objective truth is the common word. And then the other foot, I definitely have firmly planted more in the experiential side of things, or what we would call phenomenology. Phenomenology being just human experience. Truth is determined by the quality of our experience. And when it comes to this very human space, this human experience of healing and well-being, I think it's so important to have a foot on each side of the fence. Because truth, when you're trying to convince someone to do something, or when you're trying to share a truth with another practitioner or another client, truth has to be shareable. It can't be only personal truth, right? If I think that, drinking cyanide is really good for people, it's a truth. If that's my truth, it's a truth that is very difficult to share, because it will have disastrous consequences if people believe it. Right? And there are many variations and gray areas on that. So somewhere on earth, there's someone that believes that it's very good and healthy to drink cyanide. And until the point where they drink cyanide, they're not dead. Right? So
no, for sure. I
really
mean, I'll also counterbalance my opinions or my thoughts with other resources, existing resources, or experiences. Definitely, I think is a big one. What's my experience on this? A lot of what I'm sharing now with the other videos that I'm doing, again, is not claiming that this is the way to do it, but this is my experience. And through this experience, I've gained this knowledge, or I've gained this openness, right? So I think that's a big one as well. And
so
I'd like to be, sorry to cut, no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd like to be a little bit more scientifical, and this book that I'm reading has kind of opened that interest in that. I tend to, for that kind of resource, I'll tend to go to someone who I trust, who I know has good logical way of thinking, and who has a good track record as my source for scientifical stuff, gibberish sometimes to me.
Right.
And you being one of those people most of the time. But I have to admit that my curiosity has been piqued, and I definitely see more value in that now. I think the value of that before was less important. It was still there, but it was just intimidating, I guess, for me was what it was. It was intimidating. I didn't know where to start, where to go. These words I don't understand. I have to research. And how do I determine which research is good and which one is not, or which one is true and which one is fabricated or has some different agenda? So I just found, I guess, that world kind of intimidating to me, and also not so valuable in the sense where it wasn't necessary to navigate the life that I was in at that time, you know? And now wanting to be a little bit more into this journey of healing, this journey of finding happiness, I'm seeing where there's research that is very interesting that can bring some really valuable points. So, so the value of that has augmented, and has become more present in my life.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think scientific literacy is something that we need to actually develop and train for. It's its own thing, but it is definitely not absolute. The problem I encounter all the time in life and in my work is that people who are a little bit more on your side of the fence, on more of the spiritual, psychological, phenomenological side of the fence, think I'm a hyper rational, jerk, and I'm being really hard on them. And then my friends and clients who are more on the rational side and are, engineers or doctors or whatever, they think I'm totally out in space. I'm like sitting on a cloud, like, meditating and drinking ayahuasca. And the reality is that I'm both, and I do both on purpose. I've trained to do both. So you can subject phenomenology, psychology, human experience, you can subject these things to scientific scrutiny. Right? So the exciting place for me, the exciting place in both personally and professionally, is where phenomenology and science and objective truth meet up, right? Where they come together. That's the most exciting place. And if you understand what science is not something that's here to take away all your beliefs and your joy and your faith. If you understand what science really is, it will shed light eventually on every aspect of phenomenology. And I think it's a mistake for people in the spiritual, phenomenological realms to believe that science will never completely illuminate certain things about life. Because at some point it must. And that overlap between the two areas is getting bigger and bigger and deeper all the time. And I love that space. I'm keenly focused on that space, and I see it ever expanding. And I think it's it's where I think all the fun happens.
Yeah, I agree. I can definitely see that. It's nice to know that some of the things that we've been feeling or thinking, and there was no real proof for it, is actually there is proof now, and there is research being done about it, and agreed. I find that super exciting. But I think that there's also, some of the conversations we had of like, well, there's no way to measure this. I'm trying to think of an example, but like there's certain things that are just unmeasurable. And then just because science hasn't figured out how to measure it doesn't mean that it's not true.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. But might science eventually measure and document these things. I mean, we can get into specific topics as well, but let me give a nice soft definition for scientific truth as I think it is important, in the form that I think it is most important. It's where truth becomes not subjective, but shareable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about going automatically to objective. This is true, and screw whatever you think, and we've proven this. Because that's very rigid as well. That's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And it turns out science is always finding new truths. So old science gets dumped. And that
Exactly.
flexibility is fundamental to what science is. That's the nature of good science, right? Is to accept change and the discovery of new truths, the expansion of truth and the expansion of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But is it shareable? If somebody hits their head and injures their brain and believes that God is telling them to murder their neighbors, is that true? Is that right? Is that good? And how shareable is that truth? I mean, I guess we've seen examples like that in history where many people have been convinced of a mad person's deplorable truth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that those situations are the exception, and they're complex situations of coercion, and they're psychologically complex.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think the most important truths are shareable truths. And the question for me is how do we share, how do we expand this idea of shareable truth, agreed upon truths that are not just where we don't want to feel alone in our truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We don't want to feel like we're like, I believe this crazy thing and nobody else understands me and I'm alone in my truth. And the quest, I think, is to, how can I share this truth? How can I make it understood by others? And how can I test it against the truth that other people are experiencing?
So that's the thing. So in order to share a truth, you have to have experienced it.
But experienced it how?
Like, for example, if I just read something or someone tells me something and then I believe it to be true, but I've never actually experienced it, how do I know that that's a truth? And how can I share that knowledge with someone else if I've never really experienced it? The only way to really know that something is true is to have experienced it.
Sorry, I've got movement outside. I'm being distracted. That what you're talking about is to a large degree like the definition of phenomenology. It's that the primacy, the importance of human experience, of individual experience. So if I can't use my five senses and my brain and my emotions to experience something, how can I trust that it is real? And this is where I think scientific literacy comes in. If a bunch of different scientists from all over the world using different instruments agree that there's a planet in space, there's a new planet that they found or whatever it is, and they can agree on what this thing that they're observing is likely to be based on evidence that came before. So when we look through telescopes, we have different kinds of telescopes that are accurate to different degrees, at different points on the Earth, and we can look into space and see that there's an object there. What is that object likely to be? And we've sent out probes, so we know that our measurements, how do we compare measurements from a probe versus measurements through visual observation from Earth? How do they match up? They match up pretty nicely. So we can decide as a group, we can share our truth and agree on it, that this is likely to be a new planet.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So then truth, I just had like a thought. Truth has a timestamp on it. Because if you say, for example, Pluto is the farthest planet, we've checked, we've had our drones, we looked out there's nothing else past Pluto. We've confirmed this. This is the truth. Everyone agrees, it is. So it is. And then years later, we evolve and our truth evolves. And because we have better technology, and now we're able to go a little bit further and discover, oh shit, no, there's more stuff out there. So what was true is no longer true. So truth has this timestamp on it, does it not?
I don't think it does. I think you're talking about the reach of knowledge. So there are certain things about the macrocosm and the microcosm that we don't know. But the things we do know, for example, it's very, very likely that there was a Big Bang. We're going back pretty far in time. It's very likely, but we don't know what came before that, right?
So is that a truth? It's very likely. It's a theory. It's not a truth.
Things that the arrow of research, the arrow of thought, is guided by what is likely to be true. And we look at other theories and we say, well, this theory isn't a very good theory because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So of course there are holes in knowledge because of the limitations of what we can know. But I think to believe that we can know everything through phenomenology, but not science, phenomenology is also extremely limited by our 5 senses and our biological state. If you're just a naked ape running around in the woods, you're very unlikely to know the atomic structure of iron, for example, or you're very unlikely to know that Pluto exists. And you're even more unlikely to end up, building a colony on Mars or something like that. You need tools and slow expansion of knowledge into unilluminated spaces, and you need consensus. You need knowledge to be shareable to decide that Pluto exists, or get a colony to Mars, or I don't know, build any of the things that we've built on Earth that are sort of high tech. You can't do this as a hunter-gatherer ape with no technology and no. This is what scientific consensus is. It's shareable truth that illuminates dark spaces in the universe. So knowledge is an ever-expanding field, but there's also phenomenological knowledge and growth there. Our minds are evolving, so phenomenology changes over time.
Yeah.
Right? If we are more conscious and more intelligent and have more senses at our disposal, of course phenomenology itself is changing. Right? But the idea that when people say things that I think are platitudes, like my intuition is always right about everything. I'm big on intuition. I'm very big on intuition. It's a key component of what I do in my work. and what I teach people. But to say that intuition is absolute, and I think is a platitude and is overreach. And we talked about this one before, to say that everything happens for a reason. That's one of my favorite ones to debate, because and this brings us to what we were going to talk about today, about teleology, and
etiology.
Teleology and etiology. Sorry, lost it. Teleology, I think, is a feature of consciousness and a feature of phenomenology, in that meaning is attached to phenomena.
It's
a feature. It's a feature of consciousness. It's a feature of consciousness, not a feature of unconscious, particles and matter and energy in the universe. And I don't mind that idea. I don't, my sort of the spiritual side of me does not really, I don't care if iron atoms have a purpose or have a sense of purpose. It doesn't affect me, because phenomenologically, it's my experience of being conscious that is important. So, do I want to give meaning to everything? Do I prefer a teleological perspective? Yes, I do. My consciousness naturally prefers that perspective. But do I think that is absolute? That absolutely everything happens for a reason? No.
Because if everything happens for a reason, would that mean that everything is predetermined?
That would be my concern.
So that's your issue with that. So for me, I don't believe that things are predetermined, but I do often say everything happens for a reason, and I do believe that, but I think that I created that. I don't think that it was predetermined. I think that, for example, like this book that I found, it just fell on my lap at the right moment. And it's exactly kind of the thought process that I've been going through. And I don't even remember how it came to be, but it did. And it's just like, wow, like this book, I was meant to read it. But I know that because I've been focusing more on courage, that I saw this book, the word courage popped out, I made the link, and I made it fall on my lap. So it wasn't predetermined, but I feel like I can still say that this happened for a reason. This book came into my life for a reason, but I created that reason.
Absolutely. I love that. That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. We can end the conversation here because we figured it out. Seriously, it's funny because we've come to an impasse frequently when we have this discussion, and here we just found our way through it. We just spontaneously found our way through it, and your explanation is perfect. We give things meaning, even though objectively there may be no meaning, and it is pleasurable and beneficial in most cases to apply meaning to our experience. And this is sort of the fundamentals of phenomenology and what it is and how to engage it. But there has to be another side. It's not absolute.
So, it's not absolute. I agree. But to me, the way I see it, and that's often one of my arguments is, well, if it doesn't cause any damage, that someone thinks that everything has meaning. Oh, I saw a number, and oh, I saw this thing, and I saw this green thing, and I had to go that way because it was a green light, and whatever. If that can guide them through life in a positive way and help them figure stuff out, then what harm does it do? Why not?
I think
but
there
in
are.
balance.
Well, that's the question how balanced is it? What is it balanced against? Do people have scientific literacy as well? Are people willing to dismiss the, like, right in the middle on the fence is the idea of, is your truth shareable?
Mm.
And I want my truth to be shareable, right?
So what about my truth of the cards, for example? That's not something that's really shareable per se. I mean, I guess you can, because other people read tarot as well, but
let's go back to what you brought up about harm, about possible harm. I think we've seen what free of any consensus or objective truth or scientific approach to life. We've seen what sort of wandering through the forest of life, just interpreting signs and symbols and believing everything that you feel, right? And believing your sort of ape-based observation skills, right? Just believing this, we've seen the perils of that. And we get into a time where we didn't really have any medicine. You know, you had a horrible injury and you didn't get painkiller or antibiotics. You died in the forest. That was it. We've seen the perils of this kind of thinking with religion. It's like, we don't understand anything, so let's think up a good story, a story that sounds good, a story that sounds smart, and we'll see if we can get people to believe it, right? And we've seen the harm that this can cause. I believe that, I don't know, women must be circumcised in order to be pure and be saved, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, I believe that this life is completely meaningless and is just a test, and my real reward is in heaven. Well, there might be some problems with that. If you were to completely base all of your decision making on your tarot cards, where would your life go? And that's not a rhetorical question. That's an interesting question worth exploring. There's a famous book, kind of famous book from I believe it was written in the 1970s. I can't remember the author's name, but it was called The Dice Man. And it's about a psychologist or psychiatrist who gets frustrated with his life and starts rolling the dice to make decisions. And it ends up being this sort of wild, insane disaster of poor behavior. But at the same time, he also ends up starting a cult and getting a huge following. And to make every single decision, people are rolling dice. Like, what am I going to eat next? And what do I have an urge to, murder someone, and I'm going to give that, a 1 out of 6 chance that I'm actually going to go and murder them. Right? So here we can see sort of the perils of doing that. If you measure the tarot card experience.
But wait, isn't it actually that rolling the dice that's the issue, or the decisions that you're allowing, that the options that you're giving yourself of things to do? If all those options are positive, if I'm saying, okay, well, I don't know what exercise I'm going to do today. Do I do yoga, Pilates, go to the gym, go for a walk, or go swimming? I'm going to roll the dice. Nothing negative can come out of that. So I think it has to do with the options that you're giving yourself, not so much about how you're making those decisions.
How do you determine what is negative? If you're making a decision about exercise and you say, I'm going to, do some yoga or play badminton or go for a run, or I'm going to run a marathon this morning, or I'm going to try to lift as much weight as I can until I can't. The two latter options are risky options, and you have to assess your capacity to safely engage in those options.
Mm-hmm.
In the example of the marathon, is it even an appropriate use of your time? It's not inherently right or wrong or good or bad to run a marathon, but it's a complex decision.
Logic comes into mind. You just be logical about your options that are within your boundaries, and that follow your values.
I don't think that that's logic. That's not pure logic.
No, all three together.
Uh, Logic, boundaries, and values.
Mm-hmm. So they have
Sure.
something to bounce off of as well, right?
But isn't it clear? It seems very clear to me that people make mistakes. People make
Mm-hmm.
mistakes in their decision process and end up with bad results. I'm sure there are many people out there who have, made decisions based on tarot cards or other tools and have had bad outcomes. There are people who have abandoned the use of tarot cards because of these negative outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do you decide? Again, you're speaking from individual experience.
Yeah.
That you may not have a mental illness, severe mental illness, or a head injury, or something that makes you put dangerous or harmful options into your list of possibilities.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be clear that I have no intention of pushing aside or dismissing the use of tarot cards. I use them. But I think I balanced their use against consensus and objective truth and other sources of information.
Agreed. Just for the record, so do I. I don't make all my
Okay.
decisions rolling dice
Yeah.
and pulling cards.
Yeah.
To me, they're
Yeah.
signposts. They're
Yeah.
just signposts. In a moment where I feel like I'm in an impasse, they allow to reflect some truth in me that
Right.
gives me a direction. And
Right.
they're never what's the word? Not ultimate, but blanking on the word. It's an absolute. They're never absolute. Because it's an interpretation, anyways.
So I'll ask you a kind of funny question. If we stay, instead of going back and forth between sort of a scientific approach and a phenomenological one, let's stay completely in the realm of phenomenology. And let me ask you a funny question. Why does anyone, or why do you need tarot cards if you have and value your intuition?
Well, maybe there's sometimes that I can't tap into my intuition because I'm too emotional, or I'm stuck in my mind. I'm too analytical. And so I can't break the barrier of this analytical mind to drop into my intuition. So the cards for me help me do that. They'll get me out of my head, give me a different perspective. They'll lay out a drawing in front of me that I'm the one interpreting it. I am looking at it. And so I'm, through doing that, breaking that barrier of my brain and dropping in. So it is kind of intuition that is reading the cards in the end. And I'm using them to break that barrier, to drop into my intuition.
I really like that explanation. I think that's fantastic. And I really like, again, that you've bridged, you're kind of, it's a beautiful answer to the question. You're kind of bridging different ideas in the phenomenological realm, including like a basic psychology, which I think is great. I wonder about the intuition piece, because for somebody who can be a hyper rational jerk sometimes, I have a really strong relationship with my intuition, and I don't use the word lightly. I'm always looking to see if that thought I had, that feeling I had, is that intuitive, or is that some kind of higher logic? Is it subconscious logical processing? Is it sensory? Like, am I getting a cue from something that is almost subperceptual, like a scent that's in the air, or a feeling, or a sense that somebody is doing something they shouldn't be, or whatever it is? And those are sensory perceptions that feel like intuition, right? So I wonder, that put a question into my mind. Even though I've used tarot in the past, and occasionally still do, I still do indulge. I usually get other people to do a reading for me. I question, even though I find tarot cards useful sometimes to make decisions, and I agree with you, it kind of allows me to pop out of my mental loops, my habits of thought. It allows me to pop out of those and have another perspective. And I'm open to the idea that that perspective could be completely random, and could be completely, it's just archetypes. It's like, just, any card could come up and I would find a pattern. It would get me out of my thought loops, and I would find an interpretation to overlay onto the meaning of the card.
But it's also just a different perspective. So even if you're not capable of dropping into your intuition, it's potentially allowing you to see the situation from a different perspective,
right?
Which can help you make the decision as well.
My jerk side wants to say, well, not all perspectives are equally valid. And
Agreed.
we have to be careful what perspectives we take on as having value or equal
But wait,
value.
I'm not just saying just because you have a different perspective that perspective is truth or is. But so for example, I don't know what to eat. We're having dinner together. We're going to order out. And our decision is pizza or sushi. I really don't know. But so I'm going to ask you, what do you feel like eating? And you say pizza. And I'm like, oh, damn, I kind of wanted sushi. So it's kind of like that kind of thing where someone else kind of comes up with an answer, then it allows you to see really what you wanted. Where in the moment, I really didn't know what I wanted for some reason. I just couldn't decide. I was kind of open to both. But then once you gave me an answer, it reflected my answer. And I was able to see my truth in that moment.
Right. So that's interesting that you're speaking right now as if there is no magic in the cards. And I find that I find that interesting coming from your side, because usually we're butting heads a little bit. We're gently butting heads on this topic. And it's really interesting because you're bridging a lot of these ideas today. And with the explanation you just gave, it sounds like the magic has gone out of the equation. It's still phenomenological because it's just good psychology. It's experiential. It's a mind trick. Right?
Yeah, totally. So where I keep my little magic, because I do still have my little magic fairy dust on the cards.
Mhm.
I haven't taken it out completely. And for me, where that comes in is the cards that come out.
Mhm.
That I have no real control of, in a sense, right? So I'm
Right.
just shuffling the cards, and there's just this moment of like, oh, this is the card, like this one's got to come out. And sometimes cards will leap out of the pack. They just seem to jump out of the pack, and
Right.
those cards are just like these are like mind moments where I'm like, aha, you know.
Mhm.
So that's where that little magic of the tarot card comes out, that isn't controlled by me. That card came out and gave me the message that I needed to hear in that moment.
Right. Right. So my jerky side says, well, then isn't the tarot a beautifully designed system of mind tricks? It's a perfectly, beautifully, artfully crafted system of mind tricks and mind tools, right? That we can have such an experience with something that is fundamentally random and perhaps useless. But I don't believe that, right? I've got a big bucket of fairy dust that I keep in the back room over here. And I keep that bucket of fairy dust around because it's pleasurable, because I enjoy it, because I want magic. I'm looking for magic in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can after each moment of magic, then maybe I can say, oh, well, that happened because of the rational ideology, rational causes. I can analyze it later,
Mm-hmm.
but the magic is where the joy is. How true is that magic? Why is it true? Is a different discussion.
Mm-hmm. And so is there, again, coming back to um, the harm of beliefs, in this case, like I don't see any harm in believing that these cards came out for a reason, and that something, maybe my higher self, it could still be me, but my higher self pushed these cards out of the pack so that I could have that message in that moment. What's the harm in believing that?
The harm is that I am absolutely sure that there are a lot of people fumbling around in the dark with their tarot deck and not succeeding. You have the benefit of, whatever you're doing, however you're approaching life, you have a modicum of success.
Mm.
So that's your advantage. That's why you
Mm-hmm.
can say, well, whatever I'm doing is pretty much working and feels good. So here I go. Whereas you have other people who have um, different limitations or are not succeeding, perhaps through no fault of their own.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it from the logical side, from the rational jerky side, as I say, it's someone who is failing and failing and failing again, and just pulling random cards out of a deck and believing, following the
Mm-hmm.
advice of the random card. And we could argue that there's all kinds of different reasons why it might be failing. You can make magical metaphysical claims about why this person might be failing with their use of the tarot deck, right? So there is that argument as well. um,
Mm-hmm.
I just think that argument is less likely. I think it's more
Mm-hmm.
likely that the tarot deck is a beautifully designed psychological tool than that people who are failing with their use of their tarot card deck and not having a good life when they follow the prompts in the tarot deck are just not using them properly. They're not applying the right magic, or that they're not applying the right faith or
Mm-hmm.
belief,
Mm-hmm.
and thereby getting a poor result. I
Totally.
think the first option, I think, is much more likely. I
Mm-hmm.
cannot tell you absolutely which one is true. I just think the first one is more likely, right?
Great answer. So yeah, so it makes sense. The harm is subjective to the person doing it and their state of mind and their experience. You know,
Hmm. And we
absolutely.
see a lot of harm historically, and we see a lot of harm in our current society from people believing entirely in like what I feel is right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that spiritual growth and human evolution is based in the expansion of consciousness into toward unity rather than toward individualism. So this is for me, a psychospiritual value about why I think truth should, whenever possible, be shareable.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope. Yeah.
Does it move us toward unity consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone has exactly the same potential, and it's rather an outward expansion. It's an
Mm.
outward expansion into including other people's experiences and other people's opinions. Whoosh. We went we
Yeah.
went uh, went deep on that one. That was nice. Your
Yeah.
bridges today were beautiful. It's funny how with some of those specific topics before we had kind of, we were like both pulling on one end of the rope and then like couldn't meet in the middle somehow. And
Mm.
today I didn't even really say anything about it. You made the bridge a couple of times.
Mm.
And today I felt brought in,
Mm.
right? I felt like you brought my perspective into yours,
Mm-hmm. Because the
right?
circle has
And
expanded, not necessarily pulling to one side or pulling the other one into
yeah,
belief, but opening that circle up to include
yeah,
that
absolutely.
way of
Absolutely.
seeing things.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is so important. Like we can disagree and still go on with our relationship and even deepen our relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's so important. Without the challenge, you don't grow.
yeah, yeah,
You need the challenge in order to grow,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. I
Um,
like I like having relationships and discussions that can hold up a little bit of jousting, a little bit of pressure back and forth. And
mhm.
I hope that it's with exactly the right amount of intensity and gentleness. I hope. I often fail at that, but I hope that it's held in the right way, and hopefully we get better and better at doing that.
So I think it is important to come into discussions from a place of acceptance and not stance. I'm right,
Mm,
and this is my truth, and I'm going to try and convince you of this. Because then, of course, you're just creating conflict. You know,
right.
this conscious unity, as you're calling it, is about acceptance that we have different perspectives and we come from different areas, and your truth is different than mine, and that's okay to a certain level.
Hmm. Hmm.
So acceptance is definitely the key.
Yeah. And I think love is fundamental too. Can we see this person as a human being, and can we actually find a little bit of love for them as well? Like even if
Mm-hmm.
someone even if someone is expressing dangerous or harmful ideas, they got there somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Something brought them there. So
Exactly.
can we find sort of compassion and love for them in that?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, the people who are doing that in those moments are in pain. They
Yeah.
are suffering.
Yeah.
You know, so what good is it to come with a contradicting or harsh attitude that just tries to shake up their world already? It's already shook. You know, oftentimes just coming in with acceptance and offering them love and compassion, which is probably the opposite of what they're receiving mainly, can allow them to get out of that state and go towards love because they're receiving it, so they can see it, and maybe they can see that themselves and they can walk towards it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Love
nice.
always wins.
Very nice.
All right. Well, on that, we've been at it for quite some time now. I think that that's a good spot to end. Love always wins. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for your time today, for your knowledge and your insight and your openness and your truth. Thank you for all your shares. I really enjoy our conversations. I'm so grateful for the fact that we've kept in touch, especially in this moment for me personally, being here away from my community. It's been really great to keep in touch with you and dive into these subjects. You've been such a huge influence in my growth. So I definitely look forward to having more of these conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. I like hearing that from you. And I so value all of our conversations, public and private. And I really like what you're doing these days. I like you're just putting out a lot of good, you're just going for it and putting out a lot of great conversations and talking to interesting people. And I really appreciate that. And yeah, you're good at holding that space. You know, I've always known that about you. It's nice to see you work in this way.
Thank you. The practice of vulnerability has been a life-changing practice for me. So yeah, it's been interesting navigating around in it, because it's not something that I've navigated through, you know, being vulnerable. I've always been the warrior. I've always been guarded and shielded and thought about everything before. And my persona has been so important my whole life. So to finally peel these layers off and really walk the journey of self-discovery, which is a very vulnerable one. You have to be vulnerable in order to do it. It is fantastic, and I'm so grateful to be on this journey.
Very nice.
Well, thank you so much again for your time.
I love you very much, and we'll talk again very soon.
Absolutely. Right. Have a good day, and I'll have a good night.
Very night.